I want to tell you exactly what they handed me. A rusted shipping warehouse in the middle of a dead industrial district. 3 stories of corrugated steel that hadn't seen active use in 14 years. Broken loading dock. Cracked concrete floor. Ceiling panels hanging loose like loose teeth. The kind of building that city planners mark on maps with question marks and leave alone because tearing it down costs more than it's worth. They handed me that and called it a gift. My name is Julian. At the time I was 29 years old, working in logistics consulting, and I had spent most of my life being the son nobody in my family quite understood. My brother Marcus got a luxury condo in the financial district when he turned 25. My sister Diane got a boutique apartment with a rooftop terrace and a property manager on retainer. They got those things because those things made sense to my parents: clean, modern, impressive, the kind of assets you mention at dinner. I got the warehouse because nobody else wanted it, and because my interest in infrastructure and supply chain logistics was, in my father's exact words, my father said logistics was the plumbing of the business world, necessary, but something you hide behind a wall so you don't have to look at it. He didn't realize that in 2026, the people who own the plumbing own the building. Let that sit. Don't editorialize. Just let the audience feel that sentence. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to find out, was what was underneath that building. Not metaphorically. Literally underneath it. Buried beneath the concrete floor of that worthless warehouse was a fiber-optic trunk line, a high-density, server-grade cable network installed in the early 1990s by a telecommunications company that went under before it could monetize what it had built. The line had been decommissioned on paper. It had never been physically removed. And it ran directly beneath a building that sat at the intersection of 2 major metro data corridors. A certain kind of company pays a great deal of money for exactly that kind of location. Stay with me. Because how this ends is not something my family planned for. And the look on my father's face when he understood what he had given away is something I will keep for the rest of my life. If you've ever been handed the thing nobody wanted, and then turned it into the thing everyone wanted back, drop a comment right now. I want to hear from you. Let me give you the background, because without it the ending doesn't hit the way it should. My parents built their money in commercial real estate. They were good at it, methodical, patient, unsentimental. They bought properties when they were undervalued, held them, and sold when the market moved. They understood assets. They were not careless people. Which is exactly why what they did with the warehouse is so difficult to explain, unless you understand that they had a blind spot. And that blind spot had my name on it. Marcus was their firstborn. He went to business school, got into finance, wore the right suits. My parents bought him the condo as a foundation asset, something to build credit, build equity, build the image they wanted associated with their family name. They spent $680,000 on that property. Diane was their middle child, sharp, social, well-connected. She'd gone into marketing and knew every person worth knowing in the city. The apartment was $540,000. They furnished it. They hired someone to manage it. They said it suited her brand. Then there was me. Dry, factual tone, I studied freight networks. I read infrastructure reports for fun. I once spent a weekend mapping the underground utility corridors beneath the city because I found it genuinely interesting. My parents found this difficult to process. When the warehouse came up, an old piece of their portfolio they'd inherited from my grandfather's business partner and never developed, they made a decision. They would give it to me. Clean the books. Dispose of the liability. And frame it as generosity. My father sat me down. He said the family believed in equal treatment. He said this property was worth something to someone with vision. He looked me directly in the eye when he said that, and I knew, that he did not believe a word of it. My mother added that it was in an industrial zone with interesting potential. She was reading from a property summary. She hadn't visited the building. I signed the transfer documents 3 days later. I also immediately hired a property record specialist, a structural engineer, and an infrastructure consultant. Not because I had a plan. Because I had a habit. When someone hands me a building, I read everything connected to it before I decide what it is. That habit is what changed everything. The first time I walked through the warehouse alone, I gave myself 2 hours. The structure was worse than the photos suggested. The loading dock on the east side had partially collapsed. There was standing water in the northwest corner from a roof breach that had gone unaddressed for years. Rust had worked its way through the steel framing on the upper level to the point where I wouldn't have walked up there without a hard hat and a reason. On paper this was a money pit. But I wasn't looking at the paper. I was looking at the floor. Slow down here. Let the audience feel the shift in energy. Something is about to change. In the southeast corner of the ground level, underneath a stack of rotted wooden pallets someone had abandoned there years ago, the concrete floor had a seam. A deliberate seam, not a crack, not settling. A panel. Roughly 4 feet by 3 feet, fitted with a flush mount handle that had been painted over so many times it had almost disappeared into the floor. I found a crowbar in the loading dock. It took me 11 minutes to get the panel up. I wasn't looking for treasure. I was looking for the point of entry, POE. Every industrial site has one, but this warehouse had a vault that was built to Department of Defense specifications. The moment I saw the telco-grade protective casing, I knew my parents hadn't just given me a warehouse. They'd given me a Tier 1 data intersection. What was underneath it was not a basement in any traditional sense. It was a conduit vault, a sealed, climate-controlled access chamber about 8 feet deep, roughly 12 feet square. And running through it, bundled in telco-grade protective casing, was a fiber-optic trunk line that had no business being in a building like this. I photographed everything. I didn't touch the cables. I climbed back out and sat on the concrete floor of that warehouse for a while, just thinking. Then I made 3 phone calls. First to my infrastructure consultant. Second to a telecommunications attorney. Third to a data center industry contact I had from a logistics project 2 years earlier. The consultant arrived the next morning. He was in the vault for 40 minutes. When he came back up, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on a professional's face before, the specific look of someone recalculating a situation in real time. He told me what I was looking at. The fiber line was part of a pre-internet era backbone network, high capacity, low latency, running through a corridor that modern city infrastructure had grown up around rather than over. It was physically intact. It was legally orphaned, the company that laid it had dissolved, and the line had never been formally claimed or decommissioned in any binding way. The access rights ran with the land. The land my parents had just signed over to me. He also told me something else. The building sat at a geographic intersection that had become, in the past decade, extremely valuable to a specific category of infrastructure user. The combination of the fiber access, the location between 2 metro data corridors, and the building's footprint made it a near-perfect candidate for what the industry calls an edge computing node, a distributed data processing site that tech companies place between their cloud servers and their end users to reduce latency. Companies like the one that had been quietly buying up properties in a 3-mile radius for 18 months. I asked my contact to make an introduction. Subscribe right now if you want to see how this ends, because the moment my father reads that offer letter is coming and you do not want to miss it. The first meeting was at their regional development office. 3 people on their side of the table, a real estate acquisitions director, a network infrastructure lead, and a lawyer. I brought my attorney and my infrastructure consultant. They were professional. Neutral. They had done their homework on the property, more homework, I would later find out, than my parents had done in 20 years of owning it. They knew about the fiber line. They knew about the zoning. They had already modeled what they could build there. The acquisitions director asked me what I was looking for. I told him I wasn't in a rush. That sentence cost me nothing and changed the entire negotiation. When you're not in a rush, the other side has to decide how much they want it. We met 4 more times over 6 weeks. They came up twice without me asking. The final number they put in writing was $20 million for the land and structure, with a leaseback option on the conduit vault access that would pay a recurring infrastructure royalty on top of the purchase price. $20 million. For a building my parents described in their own transfer documents as a non-income producing legacy liability with no identified development path. I read the offer letter 3 times. I had my attorney review every line. Then I sat with it for 2 days before I told anyone. The first person I told was my accountant. The second person I told was nobody. Because here is where I need to pause, and I need to ask you something directly. Narrator looks directly into camera. Warm but deliberate. This is the 10-minute beat. I had the offer. I had the signatures ready. I could have closed that deal quietly, moved the money, and disappeared from my family's financial orbit entirely. Bought something clean in a city where nobody knew my name and never answered another question about what I did with the warehouse. Would you have done that? Would you have taken the $20 million, walked away clean, and let them figure it out eventually, when the demolition crews showed up and someone finally told them what their non-income producing legacy liability had sold for? Or would you have stayed? Would you have been in the room when they found out? I'll be honest with you. I thought about leaving. I genuinely considered it. Clean is its own kind of satisfaction. But I had spent 29 years being the son they handed the ruins to. I had spent 29 years watching my brother and sister get called visionaries while my interest in infrastructure was treated like an embarrassing hobby. I decided I wanted to watch them read the number. Direct, quiet, subscribe if you're staying for the fireworks. Because what happened next is something I could not have scripted better if I tried. Hit subscribe right now, and turn on notifications. This is the part of the story they'll never recover from. I don't know exactly how they learned about it. My best guess is the permit filings. When you sell a property to a development company, certain documents become semi-public, and if you know what to look for, the shape of a deal becomes visible before the ink is dry. My father called on a Tuesday morning. He didn't open with hello. He said, "I'm hearing something about the warehouse. I need you to tell me what's going on." I told him I had received an acquisition offer. Silence. 4 seconds of it. Then, "From who?" I told him. More silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, that specific register that meant he was already calculating, already moving pieces around a board in his head. He said they needed to meet as a family. He said there were complexities around the original property transfer that needed to be reviewed. He said they wanted to make sure everyone was protected. Everyone was protected. That is the language people use when they mean themselves. File that away. He called it maturity. I called it contractual finality. My father was trying to use family guilt as a secondary lien on my property. But liens require a legal basis, and my father's only basis was his own regret. The meeting was at my parents' house. My father sat at the head of the table, his default position. Marcus was there. Diane. My parents' attorney, which told me everything I needed to know before anyone said a word. My father opened by saying the family was proud of what I had discovered about the warehouse. That this was exactly the kind of vision he had always believed I had. He said it with a straight face. The compliment that arrives right before someone tries to take something from you is the most expensive compliment there is. Then their attorney spoke. He said there was a question about the original transfer documents. He said the warehouse had historically been included in a family trust structure, and that the transfer to me may not have properly accounted for the trust's interest in the asset. He said this was not adversarial, just a procedural matter that needed to be resolved before any sale could proceed. He slid a document across the table. I looked at it. I did not pick it up. I said, "I'll have my attorney review this tonight." My father said that shouldn't be necessary for a family matter. I said, "My attorney reviews everything. That's why I'm in this position." Nobody said anything after that for a moment. Marcus looked at the table. Diane looked at her phone. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me, and for the first time in a very long time, I think he actually saw me. My attorney reviewed the document that night. She called me at 9:47 p.m. She said it was thin. The trust they were referencing had been dissolved 8 years earlier when my grandfather's estate was settled, a fact that was documented in public probate records and in the same family files their own attorney had presumably reviewed before that meeting. The warehouse had exited the trust at that point and had been held as a direct portfolio asset until my parents transferred it to me. The transfer documents were clean. The chain of title was unambiguous. There was no procedural error. There was no trust interest to resolve. What there was a family that had realized they had handed away $20 million and was now trying to reverse engineer a legal argument to get it back. Cold, factual, this is the part where I want to be precise. I don't describe what they did as greed, exactly. I describe it as a failure of due diligence, which is the same mistake that caused them to undervalue the asset in the first place. They didn't check before they gave it. They didn't check before they tried to take it. The pattern held. I met with my attorney and a litigation specialist the next morning. We built a response file, the full title chain, the trust dissolution records, the transfer documentation, a legal opinion on the validity of the sale process. Clean. Organized. Indexed. I sent a formal letter through my attorney to their attorney. It was 6 paragraphs. It covered the title chain, the trust status, the legal standing of the transfer, and concluded with a single sentence: my client intends to proceed with the sale as contracted and will pursue all available remedies should any party attempt to interfere with the closing. Their attorney called my attorney 2 days later. He said the family wanted to explore whether there was a mutually beneficial arrangement. My attorney told him she would relay the message. She called me immediately after and said, "They folded." I want to be precise about this, because I think the precision matters. I did not disappear. I did not cut them off. I did not respond to their attempt to take the property with silence or contempt. I made them an offer. I called a second family meeting. Same house. Same table. No attorneys this time, just us. I sat down, and I laid out what I was proposing. I was proceeding with the sale. That was not negotiable and was not a discussion. However, I was prepared to allocate a portion of the net proceeds into a structured family fund, managed independently, distributed based on a formula that had nothing to do with who wore the better suit or whose interests were considered more celebratable. Equal. Not favor-shaped. Equal. Pause. Then, I want you to understand what I was doing. I was not being generous out of warmth. I was being precise out of principle. There is a difference. I wanted them to receive something real from the asset they dismissed, and I wanted them to know, every single time they used it, exactly where it came from. My father sat very still through all of this. When I finished, he asked why. I said because the warehouse taught me something he never intended it to. He asked what that was. I said, the value was always in the thing nobody looked at closely enough. He didn't respond to that. I didn't need him to. The sale closed on a Thursday. Wire transfer confirmed by 2 p.m. I was in my car in the parking garage of my attorney's building when my phone showed the notification. I sat there for a few minutes. No music. No calls. Just sat. I thought about the vault under the warehouse floor. About the 11 minutes it took to pry that panel up. About the fiber line that had been sitting there in the dark for 3 decades, completely intact, waiting for someone to look. My parents had owned that building for years. They had never once gone inside it. Quiet, direct to camera, that is the whole story, right there. Not the money. The fact that they never went inside. Marcus called 2 weeks later. He was friendly in that specific way people are friendly when they want information. He asked how I was doing. He asked about the sale, casually, like it had just occurred to him. I told him it was done. He said he thought it was impressive, that he'd always known I had a good eye for things. I thanked him. We talked for 4 minutes. I didn't ask about the condo. Diane sent a text. It said, "That's insane. Good for you." I replied with a thumbs up. That was the entire exchange. My father sent an email, not a call, an email, 2 months later. It was formal and brief. He said he wanted me to know he thought I had handled the situation with maturity. He said the family appreciated the offer I had made regarding the fund. He said he hoped we could move forward. I read it twice. I wrote one sentence back. I said, "I learned everything I know about due diligence from watching you work." I meant it. That's the part they'll never be sure about. I'm telling you this story not because I want you to see me as someone who got lucky. The fiber line was luck. What I did with it was not. I read the documents. I hired the right people. I didn't panic when they came for the property, and I didn't celebrate loudly when they backed down. I moved carefully, every step, because that is what you do when the stakes are real. They handed me a rusted building in a dead district and assumed that was the end of the story. It was the first line. Final beat, steady, direct, the thing they dismissed, the logistics obsession, the infrastructure interest, the habit of reading every document in a room, that was not a liability. It was the only reason any of this happened. Never let anyone convince you that the way your mind works is something to apologize for. If this story landed, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Subscribe if you're new, because every week I bring you a story about what happens when the person nobody bet on finally plays their hand. I'll see you in the next one.